Hello everyone and welcome back to Game Brigade. My name is Brian and today we're going to be diving into the second expansion for Moonrakers, Overload. If you are new to the series, we are talking about the expansions and we have already talked about binding ties. If you're interested in that video, make sure you click the tag up here. Otherwise, we're going to be diving into the second expansion, Overload, which adds a whole plethora of new cards to the Moonrakers experience, as well as change up some of the base rules and add some more mechanics for us to play around with. Stay tuned for that. Okay, Overload. So far, I have been very pleasantly surprised with Overload. The amount of content that this singular expansion adds to the base game experience for Moonrakers is overloading, as you might want to say. We're going to go over the different types of items that are included in this expansion, what they do, and then I'll give you my thoughts based on what I like or didn't like overall based on my experiences playing with this expansion. So to start off with, what are we looking at adding when we're adding Overload? The first thing I want to talk about are the new supply base cards. There are a whole bunch of these and you will be seeing these hopefully in the B-roll, and we're going to go over kind of what these do. So we have a bunch of these new basic cards, but they are enhanced hybrid versions of what we've already seen in the base game. For example, Thruster, we have two new versions of that. We have Thrusters, which is a strictly better version of our base loadout package, which gives us +3 cards, or we have the hybrid version, which is +2 cards plus an action, so it doesn't cost us an action to play that. Alternatively, the Reactor has the exact same variations, just with reactors. You have +3 actions or +2 actions and 1 draw card. So you can see you have the strictly better version and then the hybrid version. When we're looking at the shields, we have a similar look where we have +1 action, block 1 hazard, or block 2 hazards. And then with damage, we just have +2 damage, +1 action. We also added a bunch more misses to this, but you know, that's who wants to add misses to their deck unless you have SOS, then yes, you want misses. But these are going to be added into the available pool for cards we purchase when you're doing your buy phase. How do you get these? Well, they are all purchasable when you're buying. So instead of having to buy just ship parts or crew, you now have the option to add more cards to your deck that might be more beneficial to your strategy that you're doing. So if you want to have more card draw, if you need more reactors, or if you need more damage, you can specifically buy these cards rather than relying on ship parts to add them to your deck. Now, the ship parts that they're adding, they've got a whole bunch of ship parts that are going to be included in this expansion. And these ship parts, just like with the base game Moonrakers, will be adding cards to your deck. Normally they add the base supply, but these have a bunch they'll be adding in these hybrid cards as well. So you have an option to get these as well as the abilities in the ship parts. Now, the ship parts are also great because they actually added a lot more ship parts to give you some variable ways to play and change up some of the strategies and give you some more alternative ways to think of strategies, which I think is really cool in terms of just thinking outside of the box. And then we have crew members. The crew members, located right here, basically do what they always do, you know, just adding in more cool abilities. But they did add a new feature with some of these crew members called the IOSphere. The IOS, and I'll show you some of the ship parts as well. IOSphere deal with these tokens that you will be adding towards your cards, and some of them might say add 3 IOSpheres, or some might say do X, add IOSphere, and then you will be discarding these IOSpheres to do an ability. Unlike normal cards in Moonrakers, when you play one of these IOSphere cards, they will stay on the field until they are told to discard. For example, this crew member said add 3, so we put them on there. Once per contract, you may remove one of these IOSpheres, and it will deal 2 damage. Do not discard them until all of them are done. So this is a kind of like, if you were to think of Magic the Gathering, like an enchantment that will be staying on the battlefield and allowing you to have continual effects until he is discarded, and then he'll go back to your discard, and then if you draw them again, you can play them again. Some ship hearts have very similar abilities. They might say trash a card from your hand or discard cards from your hand, add IOSpheres, discard all of them, get a prestige or get money, whatever it may be. But it allows you to change the type of strategy you're doing with the overall scope of the game. Then they have added 2 more types of contracts for us to complete as Moonrakers. The first one is the Flex contract, and you can tell that the Flex contract because it has a holographic star located in the bottom corner. Flex contracts are some of the easier contracts to complete. A flex stands for anything that would complete a requirement normally will go towards your flex. So thrusters, shield, crew, reactors, anything in that manner will go towards the flex unless it's being used to complete a requirement already on the card, such as this one, which requires 4 reactors and 10 flex. You're going to have to play a total of 14 cards to complete this, or have cards that reduce requirements, which also works. I really like that mechanic, but we'll get into that secondly. The final contract we're going to talk about are the head-to-head contracts, and these are shown by in the bottom right corner. There'll be a split color, either purple or green or blue or yellow, and it shows that these are the type of requirements that you're going to have to complete. And this is a mission objective that's unlike any of the mission objectives that are in Moonrakers right now, because it's giving the opportunity for all of the Moonraker players to compete head-to-head for that objective. Basically, who's got the best deck to complete this objective right now? Let's find out. And it has a first place reward and it has a second place reward. So all of the people after the mission leader has selected can choose to opt in to go after this objective, and they might choose not to go in after it if they have a deck that maybe their hand is very good and they don't think that they're going to be able to win. They can opt to not go for it, but it is a way for all players to get some advantages when they aren't able to negotiate into contracts. And then we have the final thing that we added in, or I don't know how I say we, but Ivy Studios added in, are the new objectives. So these are cards that are going to be giving us more ideas in terms of how do we want to shape our decks or maybe change our play style, giving us some more variety, which is great. With the new cards, there are some new changes to the base rules. We will be drawing 3 of these objective cards at the start of the game, choosing 2, putting 1 to the bottom of the deck. And then with the contracts, if you are to draw any of these head-to-head contracts, you will shuffle those away. For your first turn, you're not supposed to have any head-to-head contracts, as well as any of the hazards over 2. So 3 and up will also be shuffled away. So that is the core Overload overview in terms of what is being added, what are some of the new rules, what are some of the new mechanics. So let's talk about what I liked and didn't like with Overload. So hopefully that was understandable. I know I came at you fast and quick there, but I am very hyped for Overload. It was a great addition to the Moonraker expansion. And in fact, I felt like this was the thing that really tipped off that Moonrakers could be a lot more than what it was overall, because they're showing how much more design space there is overall in their packaging. So the hybrid advanced supply cards, I really like the addition of these, even though they're just a little bit subtle change in terms of what the cards already do, adding another draw card, adding another reactor, giving players the opportunity to just strictly enhance their deck in terms of the deck building process is great. A lot of times in the base Moonrakers, we would have crew that would be up here, and yeah, they're good, but they're sometimes nichey, and maybe they're not what you want when you're looking to buy something. And maybe all the ship parts were were not what you're needing at that time. Maybe there's a bunch of damage and what you're needing might be shields or thrusters. So you'll be able to spend your coin and your reward money in just strictly making your deck better is great. And I also like the fact that some of these cards with the ship parts increase those as well. I do think there are some that are probably better than others, but again, that might change based on your play and based on my personal experiences. I would have to play a bunch more games to really get an idea in terms of how they've fleshed out. But overall, everything seemed to be perfect because they're all just minor tweaks on the original outlook. The crew that have been added to the game so far, all of them have been great. Some of them have kind of a push your luck aspect where it's like draw 4 cards, but then you're gonna have to discard 3, which is kind of like, ooh, that's kind of an expensive cost. But I do think that there are a lot more design spaces allowing in the crew to be able to get you with a bunch of different unique kind of combinations of decks, which is really great, which is what you're really looking for when you're playing Moonrakers, is exploring all the different types of combinations and options and strategies that the whole game is providing to you. Same thing with the ship parts. There's a whole bunch of new strategies and things that gives players the opportunity to kind of think outside the box of what they're normally used to doing. And with adding so many more cards to the overall pool, it's giving players a very good, fresh outlook in terms of what kind of strategies they want to take. The IOSphere cards seemed to be perfect additions. They seemed to make sense and flowed right into the experience. While I do think sometimes anytime you have a card that's repeatable effect is leaning on a more powerful aspect than some other cards, I do think they were balanced very well. When I say that, for example, I mentioned the SOS card. There's a card that says, discard your misses count as everything. Those kind of abilities that have repeatable effects are definitely more powerful than the one that just says get one more action or something. The overall experiences with the 2 contracts. Now, these are probably we're going to have a little bit more contention. The flex contracts were fine. I thought those are great. In fact, I thought the flex contracts were really good ways for players to feel like they can go on a mission on their own without feeling like they're going to be a failure early. So when I say that, there's times where players in Moonrakers, at least in my experience, don't want to take the next step to going from negotiating to when can I do a contract on my own. The flex contracts allow players to have a deck that may be centered around thrusters and reactors, but maybe they don't have any damage and shields, which would require to do a lot of the other missions on their own. This one might allow them to complete a mission on their own, get some good rewards, and get some of that prestige without having to rely on other players. So I do like the addition of flex. The head-to-head one is something that I personally love, but I'm going to go off some of what the people said in my player sessions based on what their experiences were. I loved the head-to-head aspect because I liked being able to compete and show what my deck was capable of comparatively everyone else's when we're all going in a neutral, even field. And I think that's kind of what they're going for with the head-to-head experiences. But what I will concede, and people said this in the play sessions, is that if someone is behind, it is very difficult for them to come back, especially with these head-to-heads, and there's just sometimes no way for them to win based on the composition of their deck. And that might be true. Maybe that's fine in terms of balancing and whatnot, but they definitely felt like there was no point in going forward because there's no way they can beat X or Y player because they just have a better deck. Maybe that's the point. I just wanted to make sure I expressed that. I didn't ever experience the feeling of like, oh man, I don't enjoy this. In fact, I always encouraged people to take them. I was like, take the head-to-head. I wanna go. But that's because I was pretty confident in my deck as well as some of the other players in the session. So that is my experience with them. So you take that as you will. Overall, what do I think of the Overload expansion as an addition to the base game of Moonrakers? This is one, in my opinion, I would say is a must-have. It adds more content to the game and adds more mechanics and things that are going to just enhance your overall experience. If I was to say there was at least one experience that I've had that's a must-have, at least for now, because there's still one more expansion I haven't played yet, Overload is definitely the pinnacle of the best. Now, I want to make sure I caveat that because Binding Ties was fun, but Binding Ties is niched down to the point because it's focusing on the negotiation aspect. So I'm very excited to see what the third expansion brings to kind of encapsulate this whole Titan experience. But right now, Overload is my favorite of the two. Now, again, we'll see what Ivy Studio says about that. I mean, they might hate me for saying something like that. I don't know. We'll see. But that's my opinion, and I hope you guys appreciate it. So this is Brian from Game Brigade. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, kind of doing this rundown of all the different experiences and play with Moonrakers. Like I said, Moonrakers in my earlier video is one of my favorite games. I love the expansions. I love how everything's kind of meshing together, and I'm super excited to see what Ivy Studio has for the third and final expansion that will be on Kickstarter coming in July. So this is it. I'm going to go and wrap it up. If you guys want to leave a comment, make sure you do that. Subscribe, like, all the things with YouTube algorithms. And I'm going to go and wrap this up. I will talk to you all very soon. Bye-bye.